Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paco Oyavidas of the Green Leadership Trust on environmental NGOs, equity, inclusion, and justice. My name is Paul Babelis, and as Executive Director of Sustainability Network, it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. Sustainability Network is an environmental capacity builder founded in 1997, and we've been helping environmentalists in Canada mostly lead, manage, and strategize for those 23 years. I'll be the MC today, and I'll hand it over to Paco in just a second, but I want to start with a land acknowledgement that we here at Sustainability Network in Toronto are on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and on the traditional territory of other Anishinaabe peoples, as well as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Huron-Wendat peoples. Although we're at locations all over North America today, I'd encourage you all just to take a moment, a pause, and reflect on what Indigenous connection you have in the communities that we're all in today. We have around 47 people on the call today, including representatives from national Canadian organizations like Nature Conservancy of Canada, Nature United, CPAWS, Wildlife Conservation Society, Eco Schools Canada, Green Communities, Green PAC, and the Sierra Club, Ontario-based organizations like Conservation Ontario, Ontario Nature, as well as Alberta-based group Iron and Earth, and Speck and Dogwood in BC. A number of people from the US joining us today, maybe not surprisingly, National Wildlife Federation, Audubon Society, Land Trust Alliance, Institute for Conservation Leadership, and state and regional organizations like the Michigan Environmental Council and the Children and Nature Network. A special shout out to my colleagues, capacity builders in the US, friends of Paco's as well. Welcome to everyone. Just note that the recording of today's session and the slides will be sent to you by end of the day, and you'll see the Paco goes over a lot of information, a lot of references, but all that will be available to you after the session. Let me just retrieve my, okay. So Francisco Paco Oyavidas, PhD, has worked on environmental sector diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for over 20 years. He assists in strategic planning, as well as conceptualizing, innovating, learning, and importantly, taking action. His focus always being on building power of the environmental movement by facilitating opportunities for people of color to excel in the sector. So over to you, Paco.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this session today, which will really go by quite fast in terms of these 60 minutes together. I am calling to you from North Central Ohio, where I have a home office, and I am on Wyandotte land. Wyandotte Indians were here originally before us. I've been living here for 11 years. And I lead this group called the Green Leadership Trust, which is US-based, national, and where we place people of color, Indigenous people, in boards of environmental groups. So Paul and I talked a little bit about being able to share some reflections of US with trying to adapt some, what I've learned, the Canadian case, not too far in the sense of a gap between the diversity makeup of environmental boards and equity, inclusion, and justice considerations. So as all of our fellow capacity builders know, and a good practice is always setting an environment, a vessel where people feel safe. So in a sense, we do have the chat function for you to click on some comments if any questions arise. I will definitely be able to follow up with any of you because again, admittedly, I will go through a lot of content, a lot of best practices that we learned over the years. And if anything is unclear, I do apologize beforehand. United States, we are celebrating definitely a very, very different week this week than last week. We are optimistic and hopeful that the tide towards racial equity is swinging in the opposite direction than the past 4 years. And all of you in Canada are probably very aware of a lot of the things that have happened to Americans throughout this past 4 years, and the legacy of systemic racism. So through most of my facilitation, we unwritten, but here they're spelled out, guidance for us to be able to, again, feel comfortable. I, I like that quote that we operate at the speed of trust, which you'll see in other slides. But this work, which I've been doing for 20 years, is it's all about relationships. It's all about that trust and that transparency. I was just off the phone with a board that I serve for the Ohio Environmental Council, and we were discussing items whether to include background checks in future board members and the pros and cons about this. But in a sense, what I'm mostly focused on, if your board, if you're looking to recruit somebody that is a person of color, maybe the first one or the only one of their race, to number one, make sure that it's not being done just for diversity's sake in terms of checking off a box. It's not a task. It's more of a mindset. It's more of a culture. So here are some agreements that I've used in the past that you can see for yourself how we are just positioning our work and our mindset into respecting other people's point of view, into making double checking your unconscious biases, your privilege, and moving towards a commonality that will allow everybody to thrive with their own skill sets. Just a little bit about me before going into it. I have had several trainings on diversity. I provide them myself now. In a seminal work that came out, I think it was 2014. So there on the bottom right, The State of Diversity in Environmental Organizations by Dorceta Taylor. Actually, my organization commissioned that report that showed that definitely there's, at least in the United States, this green ceiling of no more than 12% of board makeup was comprised of people of color and indigenous people. That was in 2014. We've worked really hard on it. We've only moved the needle about 1%. So we're like at 13%. So we have a long ways to go. Frankly, other findings in this research showed that there was an apathy originally in 2014, not an intentional effort on diversifying. Fortunately, things are very different now. There's another work that Paul shared with me. There's a book that has been turned into a Netflix movie. There's Something in the Water. Dr. Waldron was a speaker in the Sustainability Network a few weeks ago. And it just shows how, of course, pollution is disproportionately affecting people of color. And if it's not pollution, it's COVID now, right? Or it's both. And so why these people, us included, need to have a voice, need to have a seat at this table. And these tables are evolving even as we speak. So we are hearing about how to be more just in our reactions, in our choice points, and in a sense, turn that mentality where these folks have a lot to give in traditional knowledge, in expertise. They're also the ones that are affected first with climate change, and they're some of the greatest percentage of first responders, as they're referred to in the United States. So with all of that in mind, to me, it's a no-brainer that diversifying your board, diversifying your organization leads to not just greater representation and be true to your mission and to your programs, but it allows you that wealth of information, of points of view. And it definitely helps strategically for buy-in, frankly. So it's not the white savior mentality of we're here to help you out and this is what we think you should be doing. It has to start back from we're here, we have some funding, we have some tools. Can we work with you? What are your priorities? How can we work as equals? And so in many circles, it's referred to as the sharing of power, the giving up of power. So for this conversation, taking from a few articles that Paul also shared with me, we want to just reflect on some of those blind spots that frankly are unconscious in most of us, some of those biases that lead to racism and turn it around to anti-racism. Racism is a loaded term, and I'm not alluding to folks with white cloths and burning crosses, but it is a subset of a culture that other folks have mentioned. When we don't do anything about it, we're contributing to the situation. So we want to highlight some of these blind spots, explore your collective and individual journey of equity, share a few of these tools and insights, and then build intentionally your organizations. I've done a few podcasts recently. I've also been a part of a few trainings myself. So my individual journey growing up in Mexico City, where frankly, my wife, which is a white ally, pointed out very clearly, I actually have lived both situations. Where in the United States, I'm a person of color, I'm a Hispanic male, straight. In Mexico, I was not considered a person of color because I was a Mexican and I was actually more of the European influence. So I enjoyed some white privilege. So I've lived both situations, the first 20 years of my life in Mexico, the next 30 years of my life here in the United States, where at first I was not a minority, I was actually under the privileged class, upper middle class, educated. And now back in the United States, having to fight some frankly ignorant situations where how can you speak English if you are Mexican? Are you really Mexican? And you just have to see my last name to honestly believe. Francisco Oyervides. It's Northern Basque. I have done a lot of work with Chesapeake Bay Trust, the Stewardship Network, other allies, other capacity builders. But there's one more personal course that I've taken recently that I want to share, this Kofi on the bottom left, Community Organizing and Family Issues. It's the way of empowering Black and Hispanic mothers and grandmothers who sometimes are single parents. This model was first brought up in Chicago 2 decades ago, but it's building up a lot of steam where these individuals, which frankly have their family and their children and grandchildren as their number one priority for their welfare, how can they become organized? How can they become get their community organized? So there's no outside help there. It's just empowering them, giving them tools, in a sense, building up their leadership. And that's what I've been doing for the past 15 years. Through that journey, I have encountered several amazing consultants. One of them, Heather Berthoud, which shared this diversity diamond, which is, for me, it's a very, very good example of how we begin this journey. In the bottom left of this diamond is the self-awareness, your individual internal focus. As there's exercises out there on the internet, there's books about it. As you became aware of some of your differences and biases, you start learning, you start evolving, you start gaining skills, and you move to the bottom right of your interactions with colleagues, with peers, with coworkers, with other family members. But if you go to the top left, the organizational culture is this internal culture of the organization where some of these bad habits are being called out, are being examined, where the organization starts creating some value systems, some ways to check ourselves for this diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice principles. And eventually the extreme right, top right, is how our organization will be related to other organizations. or with other communities and other stakeholders. So the top right of this diamond exemplifies what the bottom left of this slide shows, how now companies are starting to talk about racism. What are they doing to combat some of these systems that are very, very old? And in a sense, what have been the obstacles? We definitely will have a moment to share some of your own obstacles when I've heard it all, right? We cannot recruit enough people of color. They're just not out there, or they're too busy with their own frontline issues, or it is a matter of breaking the mold, thinking outside the box, advertising in certain channels that I can share, at least for the American model. It is, again, making sure that the internal culture of your organization, that the inside of the organization is ready, it's welcoming, and in a sense allows people to not just be recruited but also be retained. So this other model here that a colleague, Marcelo Bonta, shared recently shows us a continuum, which is by no means just meant to be from left to right, but you can adapt it to any kind of journey in yourself, as you begin with not knowing so much about it and becoming aware of it, to looking for articles, doing exercises, talking to people, building your skills, all the way to becoming that change agent. I would consider myself in the second to last square there, the green one, developing agency. I still am not a trend maker by any sense, and this is in the area of diversity and equity. But somebody, a board that I was talking to, was asking me about access, physical disabilities. And so in that area, I would definitely be on the earlier parts of raising awareness and gaining knowledge. There's definitely, you can be in different places here on this continuum on different issues. And those three articles in the bottom are just things that bombard us every day, at least in my inbox, and in suggestions of what people can do. The middle one there has been very famous recently, where the newest president of the board of Sierra Club is actually a member of Green Leadership Trust. Ramon Cruz is Hispanic for the first time in 127 years. And not just the board president, but also the executive director, a colleague of mine, Michael Brun, re-examining the earlier stages of conservation in the United States, Sierra Club being 128 years old, I believe, or 148, one of the two. But how it was, of course, first seen as just a way to protect nature for being able to hunt more, basically, and excluding indigenous people and using Black, Asian, and nowadays migrant workers for doing some of those conservation projects. But in a sense, how some celebrities are now using also their status to call off these injustices. There's a WNBA player and Natasha Cloud. This article by the Washington Post was really, really good. They're all very, very short articles. And again, I'd recommend, as you're moving through your own journey, where you can gain a little bit more knowledge, a few more readings there. I also have included a few Canadian articles there. One that is very famous, I think this book of White Fragility is now 2 years old, by Robin DiAngelo. This is a white woman speaking to white folks. And it really, really has resonated more lately, the term white fragility, how white people examining of their privilege, of their condition. And this exercise, we don't have time right now, but definitely you could look it up. It's just 28 statements. I included the first 8, and you see there on the bottom list is a checklist. It came out quite a long time ago, considerably, 2009. And I do this exercise with some boards. We draw a ruler, 1 through 10, 1 being very little, 10 being most proficient. And we read each statement and we just grade ourselves. How do we feel about this particular statement? And you can start seeing trends, whether you again are in the earlier stages, in the middle stages, or in the proficient stages. And again, it's personal. it's easy, it's cheap, and again, it's also as confidential as you want to make it. So there's some ways out there that you can yourself start examining uh, blind spots on consciousness and areas for improvement. I hope that makes sense. Um, and then I participated in this bottom left, this racial equity challenge. Very, very easy. You sign up for it. You get a reminder on your phone every morning. You set up at what time. I get it at 8:30, and it shows you an article. It shares an article. It talks about a particular topic of privilege, of bias, of microaggressions, whatever it may be. And you're tracking as you're reading it. You share comments with the community, and out there, there's so many ways now that you can uh, gain tools, gain understanding, gain knowledge that I really encourage if you're going through this journey to look at this. The inclusion habit, I haven't done it, but I have heard good things about it too. Again, it's just a series of easy exercises. And again, I'm saying you don't need to be an expert in diversity, equity, inclusion. You just have to reflect on your own experience day to day, on your choice points, and how that transcends to your organizations and eventually from your organizations to the public. Microaggressions, definitely a very interesting exercise where we're learning um, things that we may say. These are all quotes that people have heard in their life. Um, and that people may feel that they are said in gist, or that they are not meant maliciously. They're not meant as hardcore racist comments, but at the same time, they're also affecting folks. So um, there's exercises out there that you can do to examine if you have been a victim of a microaggression, or if you have done a microaggression. And frankly, none of us escape it. It's just accidental. But the more we realize it can happen, and the more we realize it has an impact on people, uh, I have been getting a much better at not falling under that mistake. I alluded to earlier that I had the privilege of living in a white culture in Mexico, having a phenotype more of the European descendants in Mexico. But it is a common knowledge out there that there is a culture, a white supremacy culture, that hinges on some of these characteristics, where defensiveness as opposed to collaboration, paternalism as opposed to collective uh, crowdsourcing, the illusion I had mentioned of sharing power, individualism, all of these characteristics, as you recognize them in yourself or in your organization, don't fret. There is ways. There's an antidote for each of them. There's a traditional way, a different way of approaching some of your everyday activities. So, like I said, I I like this book that we move at the speed of trust, and I have frankly been evolving in the past 3 years, where urgent deadlines become less important than the developing of a relationship with folks, or of getting to a true uh, transformational experience and not transactional. What I'm trying to say is, an example, I went to a board meeting. It was only 3 African American women and myself. I was ready to go through introductions, 5 minutes each. I was, and after 20 minutes of introducing ourselves, going into the exercises with them. I quickly realized, after the first person had taken about half an hour to explain me her journey of how she joined that board, that my agenda was not going to work. And this is a little bit over 3 years ago in Detroit. So I frankly closed my laptop and I was just taking notes and learning about them. So each of them took turns, and each of them took about half an hour explaining to me why they believed in that cause. In the end, it was a much better meeting, in a sense that we were no longer strangers. We now knew a little bit of our own life histories, and we were now ready to move on to working on things in this non-traditional white supremacy culture. Another group that I worked with, we had done the introductions the first session, we had done several exercises, and there was very, very little feedback, very little engagement. It was probably 11 African-American board members and myself. And the next month, when I was doing another set of exercises, much more exchange, much more camaraderie, much more openness. And I even paused and said, wow, you're doing much, much better than the first time we met. And the board president said, well, frankly, we were just checking you out. We're just trying to get to know you at first. So that's what we have to realize, that just like dating, you can't just jump straight into it. You just have to take your time to build these relationships, to be intentional. The group that I'm working on with right now has several best practices out there. I'm gonna go through a few of them. Some of these people on the top right have been the first of their race in boards of Sierra Club, Audubon, League of Conservation Voters, Greenpeace, some of the first Hispanics, some of the first Asian Americans, some of the first African Americans. And so that's what Green Leadership Trust, that was created 8 years ago, began to collect, to amass this individuals that at first we were very few, and now through the peer-to-peer learning method and placement, that's what we're doing now, being able to position people of color in environmental boards. The first thing we suggest is doing a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice audit. That is having a hard look at your investment on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Which of your programs are really focusing on community aspects, which include your community, which of them are higher within the community. All of your decisions in your organization through an equity lens. That's how an audit can be done. There's some resources I will share with later. Actually, the Chesapeake Bay Trust there on the bottom right, they have commissioned a book that is called Diversity, Equity, Justice in Action. And it's a handbook, it's a workbook that can walk you through making an audit. An audit will be only as strong as if you have also a committee in place. So when you're really serious about diversity, when you're really serious about not just reacting to all the external pressures that you have to have diversity, but when you have people and money dedicated to this, a formal committee should be an integral part of the structure of your organization. That committee will help you doing some diversity, equity, justice plans. So it will be incorporated into all of your other programs, all of your other priorities, but it will also determine your new hires, your policies, and ultimately new recruitment of board members. Some of these committees have produced diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice statements. There's one there, the Chesapeake Bay Trust. They produced that statement. This was after earlier this summer, in July, there was a birding incident in New York Central Park. There was an African-American gentleman that was an avid birder. He actually was with the Audubon Club of New York. And there was a woman, white woman, that had a dog not on a leash. Many of you may have heard about it. He asked her to put the dog on a leash because they were in a buffer area where birds were supposed to feel safe and not be chased around. She refused to it. Then she threatened and actually called the police saying, I've been threatened by an African-American man. He actually recorded the situation, and a lot of public media came out of that. That man, Chris Cooper, is actually a member of Green Leadership Trust. So we produced some of these statements. Somebody said, we heard that woman is Canadian. I'm not sure, but her last name was also Cooper. But so that was interesting that they had the same last name. I know the only thing I know is that she did get fired from her job. She did lose custody of her dog. Chris was talking to us in private that he actually didn't mean any harm for her, but he was just responding to her attitude. And a lot of statements have gone out there. Chesapeake Bay Trust produced that statement, but they also quoted all these other organizations there in the bottom of making statements. And you can see there, Green Leadership Trust does have a statement out there where we were responding to some racist situations with a committee talking about these things, bringing these things up, and discussing ways forward. You can definitely be able to respond. And I mentioned earlier, budget allocation, having enough money. There is a benchmark that some funders look for. Those environmental organizations in the United States that are very, very into diversity, equity, and inclusion, they ask you for how much of your budget is dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a best practice is at least 30%, which is actually quite tall, but very few organizations are able to achieve. But that is what you should aspire to. About 30% of your resources should be dedicated to making decisions with that equity lens in place. I'm going to pause for a second to drink some water. Thank you. So in Green Leadership Trust, we have monthly member calls. We Zoom all the time. The second Tuesday of the month, we have guest speakers. We talk about current issues, whether it's responding to racist situations, whether it is planning and suggesting a few names for the Biden-Harris transition team, whether it's talking about impacts of COVID. We have this space where folks sharing their news, their opportunities. We advertise for job opportunities, for board positions, and we're just a national organization that meets regularly. We've already answered this, but you may want to do this. Do this exercise with your board. Why you're doing diversity? From the strategic point of view of including more stakeholders, maybe even of attracting new donors, the empirical reasoning of diversity, why it makes sense, and the ethical considerations. All three of these aspects it's an interesting exercise to be doing. We can see there are a few other news clips. 17 companies pledging to add a Black board member by 2021, and yet on the same month, Trump banned diversity trainings amongst federal employees. So when we heard this, some of our work got actually had to pivot, and it was the excuse was that when we're criticizing the current American way of being racist, it was being anti-American. So needless to say, that's now 2 months past, now old history, but we're still trying to move forward in answering these questions, why it makes sense. And the pledge of those companies comes also from the fact that a legislation just passed in California last month, where the governor mandated or introduced this bill where corporate boards had to include, at the very least, one minority member in every board moving forward. So now there's the for-profit sector that is also getting on the ball of recruitment. Sometimes I hear folks saying, well, we don't have any more board seats. And I don't remember his name, but the person that started the website LinkedIn, he actually stepped off his board. He's a white gentleman, and he was quoted as saying, if we don't change our bylaws where we increase the number of seats in my board, but I get that we need more diversity, I'm willing to step down. So some founders are also starting to lead by example, in the sense that they have answered these questions, why it makes sense, and so they are taking the necessary steps to make more space for minorities. As I was preparing this presentation, a few big incidents happened through the United States. John Lewis passed away, and there was an amazing op-ed in the New York Times, which if you haven't read, I would recommend it enormously, of steps for empowering folks. And also we lost Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg So I just wanted to honor these two people who have been instrumental to where we are right now, but they did have to break several ceilings of race and of gender. As I was saying earlier, there's many exercises you can do out there. You can pose this very simple questions, the obstacles, and I would welcome if in the chat box people could type in obstacles that you have encountered as you're trying to diversify, or maybe even some solutions that you have found. I'll be glad to talk with Paul about those towards the end of this presentation. The bottom left corner is one of the only 3 African American CEOs of Fortune 500. Ursula Burns. She was the CEO of Xerox Corporation, but to be honest, diversity in the corporate boards is also lagging. I would say there's about 5% African American CEOs of Fortune 500, about 4% Latin Americans, about 5% Asians. So between all 3 of those large ethnic groups, and needless to say, I don't even have stats for indigenous CEOs of Fortune 500. There is now the pressure, there is the realization that there needs to be a change. There has always been a majority white control or dominated fortune and decision making. So hopefully some of these things are changing. There is about 25 women CEOs in Fortune 500 organizations. So at least in the gender, they're a little bit better. But I just wanted to remind you that we still have a ways to go. Traditionally, when we discussed about these perceived and real obstacles, we realized that really these obstacles can easily be circumvented by again thinking outside the box. For example, if you claim that it's hard to advertise or it's hard to recruit for minorities or indigenous groups, then it's maybe actually the channels that you're using. There has been studies that African Americans in the United States prefer certain professional networks, certain ways of submitting their curriculum, which are different than the traditional American standard. So there's also, at least in the United States, HBCUs. These are historically Black colleges and universities, where there's a huge pipeline of leaders that are waiting to be recruited, or they are being trained to be professionals. Here's the book I had referenced before from Chesapeake Bay Trust, a great manual, which is free. I did talk to them earlier about it. They said, yes, we created it for free distribution. So great exercises there for an audit if you wish to do it to yourself. So these are some collection of statements that I have gathered over the years in a sense, what I refer to how we're stuck, how, again, white fragility is responding. I like particularly the 4th bullet, where we have a lot of older generation folks that spend a lot of the time trying to establish why they're not racist, and in a sense, not getting us any closer to moving towards being diverse. So putting these statements out there, some of you may relate to them, some of you may have said them yourself. I just want to again offer them as an alternative now of getting it. These statements are here on the flip side, or the antidote. If you can relate more to these go along the lines of that relationship, that transformational relationship that I've been talking about. A great podcast that Paul shared with me here, that you can learn about people's journeys, and then as an exercise, try and take these bullets and see how you can adapt them or exemplify them in your own everyday activities. I said I was going to move fast, so I want to just leave you with 9 suggested best practices for your organization. The first of all bases itself on the GEMES principles, a meeting that happened several years ago in New Mexico. These are the principles here, but it talks to first your organization. There has to be a tipping point of commitment, of cultural change, of momentum. So you have to have a common language, a definition of terms, and you have to have an agenda. As a group that I used to work for, River Network, they have done that for the past few years. Their latest publication, they actually showed their journey, how they have been evolving, how they have been transforming, and more of this integration into their budget, into their handbooks, into their statements. So great publication out there from this month's River Network. I think it's called River Voices is their publication. You can look it up in the internet. After that, like I said, as we're developing terms, you have to make it official, not just internal, but on the right corner, the Wilderness Society, which is a group, a national group that we help place board members. They have now done 3 years in a row where they have a report on their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, both anecdotal and quantitative. So they have both numbers and also stories to share. And then there's this other group here, the Climate Advocacy Lab, that also has many tools for first getting the information out, gathering stories, and sharing with intentionality. Of the 9 points that I'm suggesting, number 3, I've already mentioned it before, but I think it's pivotal. It's critical to have, and I'm part of this group, the Healing Our Waters Coalition Equity Advisory and Action Committee. This is the group of individuals that will help you stay on course with suggestions on panelists, for suggestions to your strategic plan, to your statements, recommendations on hires. This is the group of advisors that you definitely have to have through a leadership council, through a committee, some structure. We touched on it, on having funds, incentivizing that change, incentivizing, again, my former employee, River Network, they supported me getting some of those courses that I participated in. One of them was a network weaving. That's actually how I met Paul several years ago in Ontario. And being able to, again, put money where your mouth is, committing time and staff to it. Number 5 is definitely getting outside help. You're not going to be able to do this on your own. These are several US and many Canadian groups that are consultants for various kind of exercises. They can be in-person meetings, maybe not so much right now, but at least traditionally they can plan retreats for you. They can do one-on-one, they can do just for the management or for the whole staff or for the whole board. Some resources out there. We also at Green Leadership Trust have a collection of about 33 names, but they're mostly American consultants that can help you out. Then you're cultivating that talent. Bottom left is the Sunrise Movement, millennial movement of climate. The bottom right is the Ray Fellowship. This is a fellowship that exists out there to give the opportunity. It's kind of like a paid internship for people of color in environmental groups. I'm just looking quickly through my bullet list, and one of them says there, POC +1. We, it's the third to last, we ask environmental organizations when they're doing fundraising and they want to recruit new members to give us 2 tickets. They're recruiting me, they're inviting me to their event. Let me bring somebody that I'm going to introduce to some other colleague. And so there's this other group, top left, 350.org, that they're doing a lot of cohorts of young people of color, and making affinity groups, making professional networks where many of these people will be available for the workforce, if not, they're already past college years. Supporting is very clear in terms of, again, putting money where your mouth is. Care packages sent to people, creating somatic care, self-care retreat, um, rewarding and returning diversity among staff and board members, definitely a best practice. I did this with a group called the Jam sessions, which have been in existence for several years, and best practices, sharing best practices, sharing opportunities. Um, as you are now very well into your journey, now you're having an opportunity to innovate. The bottom left, the Audubon Naturalist Society created this committee, the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee, the IDEA Committee. And they have events. One is called Taking Nature Black, the other one's called Naturally Latinos, and it's a forum for engagement. So now diversity is part of your programs. But I also have the top right Ohio Environmental Council logo there. It's the board that I just joined. And they also make a point of listening to all points of view. So in the board, there is people that are not considered liberal. There may be farmers. There may be Republicans in the Ohio case. They may be conservatives. And yes, those people are not the typical environmental board individuals, but they actively seek the other point of view. So I was very impressed when they had as part of their recruitment strategy to kind of hear the other side, as I would mention it. So there's again a lot of little bullets there of how your leadership could be addressing some of these behavior changes, how to be communicating this. And finally, of course, you have to have milestones, you have to have measurements, you have to have goals, and not just on numbers, but on attitude changes and on production of statements or feedback loops on how you're doing. So those are quickly 9 best practices that we have learned over the past that we actually go to board meetings and suggest to boards that are just getting it now. PGM1, this bottom right, is a group. It's called People Global Majority of the Outdoors, Nature, and the Environment, which I believe is not just US. It does have several members which are Canadian. And again, it's of the younger generation leadership. So what does success look like? Right now, I'm in one of these campaigns. It's called Arm in Arm. It is for climate change that is definitely has a large component of people of color in it. As I've said, there's been very famous articles from the Sierra Club. The bottom right, you can see right below my picture, the second picture on that Zoom call, Ramon Cruz. That's the first Hispanic president of that board of Sierra Club. And then next to him, Michael Brun, that's the executive director of Sierra Club. And they are re-examining their history. Those 3 bullets I gathered from an article that Michael produced recently. So calling it what it is, which I actually commend. I've seen many instances where Canadians have been showing a lot of rectifying and acknowledgement of impacts in the past. So I think you're on a good track there. But then again, challenging your systems. When Michael produced these statements, he was going to lose some of its members, some of its funding. But in the same breath, I feel that it was a good decision for him to look, and that's why I'm posting him as something that looks successful. And the last thing I want you to share with us is what from this can you think you can implement right away? What will take maybe a few more people to rally behind you? And upon doing research for this presentation, I did see that there's a petition out there by the Canadian EPA, the Environmental Protection Act, to actually include more minorities and more marginalized communities into their committees, decision-making committees. So at least there's some government support for some of these initiatives. And this last one is a group that Paul also suggested with me, that there's some resources out there more closer to you for the pipeline of talent. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll open it up for questions.
Great, Paco. Well, thanks very much. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A function, but if people want to, and I'll get just in a second, I'll get to the first of the two. If there are other questions, please put them in the Q&A function. But maybe if you do have some ideas around what your next steps will be, and if you want to share that as a group, maybe just as I prepared the first question, you can put that in the chat, and then Paco can have a look over what goes in there. So maybe I'll ask the first question while people are posting what they want in the chat box. And it's a question that you might have addressed because it's a question that came in early on. So I'll ask it and then I might just kind of rephrase it at the very end. But it's about, could you share some examples of what items or projects are included in the 30% targeted DEIJ budget recommendation? So I think you might have gone through some examples at the end. So if you don't want to, maybe highlight your top three or something like that as far as actions and how you came up with that 30% target.
Well, I didn't come up with it. It's amongst environmental foundations that I learned kind of like through the grapevine. But some of the metrics easy to see are like when you're doing a project, whether you're compensating local wisdom, whether you're involving local communities in your planning process of whatever program you're doing. So if you're doing a restoration, a cleanup, or a new policy, whether you're inviting them at the beginning to help you create that program, and whether you're actually compensating and there's money that is going to these communities. That's a very easy metric. And so if it shows along your budget that you have a line item dedicated to compensating local expertise, that's a very easy example. And there's others in terms of recruitment, in terms of compensation for board members when some of them may need help for travel, that they may be have a smaller budget compared to the rest of your board members. There's just different decisions that you can showcase in your budget that it has really that mentality of equity.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paco. The second question, and we will have time to maybe another one or two, so encourage you all to type into the Q&A box. It's a scenario. So we are an all-volunteer small group of field naturalists, primarily function to provide opportunities for both members and non-members to enjoy nature and support conservation. The board is a working board. All board members work to run the club, including programs, et cetera, et cetera. Our membership is not diverse. Recruiting diverse board members simply because of their race or culture seems wrong. Do we work first to actively attract diverse members, then approach some of those members to be on board? Sort of a sequencing effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've learned a little bit about board histories. And so a board has typically 3 stages: the founding stage, where everybody's very homogeneous and where you don't have staff. And again, like that person is saying, the board is a working board. Then it's a transition stage where you hire first or second staff person, and you start, in a sense, diversifying your own makeup. It's not just your close friends that help you found this effort. And eventually it's the institutional board, where groups like the Nature Conservancy, they're pretty large, or Greenpeace, where board membership there is more for resource opening doors and funders. So I suspect this group is right between founder and transitional. And to answer the question, it's not wrong to target or to try and diversify, unless you're doing it just to look diverse. The best practice to do is first, again, examine your culture. How are you inclusive? How are you welcoming? How are you checking those microaggressions? How is the environment comfortable for all races and all people to be interested in your activities? And as we know, with these working boards and these volunteers, this is where you test your future board members, those excellent volunteers that have already shown interest in your organization. So unfortunately, it is word of mouth, relationships, who these people talk to, and if their circles are very homogeneous, it'll be hard. But that's where, again, if your organization has that internal culture that is welcoming, that is transparent, that is all inclusive, you will be attracting by default people of different races.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paco. And I guess the final question comes, do you have general recommendations or even particular foundations you can suggest for tapping into funding to support DEIJ efforts and capacity building in an organization?
I don't know if they fund Canadian groups, but definitely I have the experience of the US groups. And several foundations this past summer have come up with statements saying they're allocating more funds to this. There is Hewlett Foundation, there is Kresge Foundation, there's a the Wallace Global Fund, the Packard Foundation. Those are the large foundations that have had statements saying we reject racism. We are actually doubling our efforts, or we're increasing our support for our current grantees. One other thing that they're doing, the Packard Foundation and the Hewlett, is that they're giving out free support to NGOs that are during COVID suffering financially. So they're providing expertise, scenario planning, fundraising, a lot of things for their grantees to be able to adjust their funding model or their scenario planning. So they pay experts who provide office hours, and so it's not a grant, but you're getting that training if you just tap into it. I've seen that with several foundations in the United States. Some of these foundations are international. I'm going to say Walton and Ford Foundation are also pretty international. But a cold call to a foundation, it's hard. As I've learned, you do have to build that relationship. You do have to have your reputation to be invited to larger grants. So it takes a long time to be able to tap into some of those resources, but they're there.
Yeah, nice. Okay, great. Good recommendations, Paco. So I think there we will draw things to a close. Happy to share that with the 47 participants comes a $470 contribution to Paco's organization. Sadly, it translates to a lot less once you do the currency conversion, but we'll do our best to get a good rate. A reminder to everybody here that the recording of the slides will be sent to you by end of the day. And check out other things we have coming up, sustainabilitynetwork.ca. If you registered for this session, you'll be on our list to receive our blasts. So you'll get notices of things we do have coming up. When you do close the window, you'll get a pop-up screen about some feedback. And so we'll definitely take that to heart, share that with Paco. So take a minute or two to give us some of your ratings, some of your feedback would be much appreciated. And thanks to everyone for coming out today. These are trying times, somewhat rosier in the last week, but still, it's a tough time for everyone. So hope everyone takes care and continues their important work. So thanks to everyone. And
thank you very much. I apologize. I feel like I rushed through it like a train. But again, my email is available. This is my full-time job. Please don't hesitate to contact me. I love helping people out through the internet. So just let this be the beginning of it. Thank you, Paul.
Well said, Paco. Bye, everyone.